Good morning, everyone, and Happy New Year. My name is Chris Markovic. I'm with PMA Brethour, and you are logging into the first episode of our fifth season of the CIBC PMA Summit Series. We're thrilled to have you here, and to kick off our new season and our new year, we'll be welcoming Ben TAL from CIBC to give us a good look as to where we are with respect to the market. Andy Brethour is joining us on the call today, and the two of them will have a nice one-on-one conversation and bring up some of the topics that I'm sure you guys all have questions about. I'll be monitoring in the back any questions, so please, if you have questions, please post them to the Q&A section by pressing the Q&A button. And we will give it a couple more minutes before we get started. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of CIBC, our title sponsor, our media partner, McEwitt, and all of our other sponsors who are behind this program and have been for many years now. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or becoming a panelist, please send me an email. My email is chrism@pmabrethour.com. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor or a panelist, you can also send us an email to info@pmabrethour.com. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Andy and Ben. Ben, Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Chris, so much. Great to be with everyone this morning. I'm delighted to share this time with Benjamin TAL, the world's smartest economist, and he will bring us some great insight that I'm looking forward to. Let me begin by, it's hard to hear, Ben, this crowd out here, and we've got a big one today. We can't hear that on the other side of a Zoom presentation, but I hear this great sigh of relief, kind of, there's a few even hoorays going on out there at the delightful passing of 2023. If you want to describe the good, bad, and the ugly of what our housing market has been, 23 captures the bad and the ugly. No matter what position you're in product type, no matter where almost across the country, 23 was a very difficult year, probably the most difficult in my memory since the early 1990s recession. And I think Ben would say that, and he'll comment on this in just a minute, but he'd say that housing has been in a deep recession. The interesting part about it is, and I'll just spend a few seconds on looking back before I try to really focus on looking forward, because that's the key to 24 and into 25. And you've all been experiencing this kind of rough and tumble period, so you don't need more bad news from me. But the story of 23, delighted that it's over, but we underperformed dramatically. We underperformed both in the resale market and new housing market. We look at just GTA for the moment, but these patterns are very similar right across the country. The resale market underperformed by 30%, running 65,000 unit sales and a normal 10-year average of 95,000. The same is true of 2022. So you put back-to-back years of an underperformance of a pent-up demand that's now approaching almost a one-year supply or a one-year period of numbers of units. Yes, we overperformed in 21, 120,000 sales in 21, the pandemic peak. And of course, the market began to slide in February, March of 22 as interest rates were hiked dramatically. But the real impact's kind of interesting that it happened more significantly in terms of price adjustment in this last 6 months, the period after this last little boost of the Bank of Canada from June and July. That 50 basis point hit was quite draconian, as it turned out, in the housing scene. And we've seen prices adjust just in that period alone, in the neighborhood between 8 and 10%, depending upon market area and product type. And that's from a probably net from the peak of the spring of 22, a change of around 18.9% or 19%, let's call it. Again, it depends on product type and neighborhood. But this last little 6 months was quite remarkable, how it actually began to adjust rather significantly. The caution going forward, though, is that do we have this enormous pent-up demand that's suddenly sitting there percolating? And I think that this market is, if I describe the first half of 24, percolating, getting ready for a rate cut. Ben will tell us when, and that's good news heading forward. On the new home side, we produced 50% less in terms of absorption in 22 and 23. 30% less in resale, 50% in new. Condo is a different story going forward in 24 than low rise. And I expect that low rise will be the story of 2024, particularly in the second half. If there's anything we look forward to in 24, it's a first half, second half year. Anticipation of rate cut will percolate the consumer to take action in the first quarter and second quarter this year a little bit. I think supply will cause that any price escalation with all that pent-up demand to remain pretty flat. But by the second half, low rise could see a spark in price movement with continuing rate cuts and the strong underlying demand quotient there as product suddenly becomes that much more affordable. The first half's going to see significant adjustment from some of our players. You've seen it already from Mattamy and Brookfield with major cuts in prices. That's going to follow across the marketplace. But the high-rise market's doing a different thing. The high-rise market has a hangover from very strong sales and very high inventory. If you combine resale and new plus assignments, it's probably in the neighborhood of 30,000 units. Annual average absorption has been in the 37,000 range, but we only did 20 last year. So it's got a long way to go to eat that inventory, and that's what will happen through 2024. High rise is going to have a tough time for recovery until 25, but low rise is going to be a spark. So there's the story of where we're at and kind of where we think we're going. And the cautionary notes really for the year ahead are, do we have this pent-up demand in an underperforming market about to spike and push prices? Do we have a price surge on the horizon? I don't think so in the first part of 24. 25 might be something quite different. Mortgage renewals are a cautionary note into 24 and 25. And as a result, the reduction in rates, I think, will be helpful there. It would be interesting to hear Ben's comments. And then condo closings. The actual number of units closing is dropping dramatically. We were 90,000 plus units under construction. It's now under 80. We're not replacing what we had. There's not new stuff coming to the market. Very soft in that regard. And so this may manage its way through, but it's going to be a rough and tumble year on closings, particularly through the first half for condo. I'm going to stop there and pass it over to Ben for his commentary on some of those things I've said. And then we'll enter into some of the general conversation. Over to you, Ben. Welcome, Deputy Chief Economist of CIBC Capital Markets. Ben.
Thank you, Andrew. Always love to listen to you. You put it together so nicely. Listen, you know, the other day I gave a presentation. It was a lunch presentation, and the elevator, somebody asked me, are you going to give us good news? And I said, well, it depends what they are going to say for lunch. Then I was thinking about it, and that's very important. What is good news? If I tell you, Andrew, that tomorrow the economy is going to expand by 5% and the job market will generate 100,000 new jobs, is it good news or bad news? Well, it sounds good because it's strong, but no, it's bad news for the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada would like to see this economy slowing down. The Bank of Canada would like to see the unemployment rising. The Bank of Canada would like to see the labor market softening and the housing market softening, and they're getting it. So really what they want to see is the economy slowing down in order to prevent inflation from rising and to continue to raise interest rates. They want to cut interest rates. So that's why we have a situation in which bad news is good news. And I think that's the way to look at the situation. And if bad news is good news, I have a lot of good news for you today. What I can tell you is the following. I think that we are in a tug of war between a slowing economy and still elevated inflation. And in this tug of war, inflation will be the first to wave the white flag. As I told you in previous meetings, at the end of the day, this is not about inflation. This is about the cost of bringing inflation down to 2%. And that's exactly what the Bank of Canada and the Fed are doing. Even if it means taking this economy into a recession, the housing market is definitely in a recession already. We'll discuss. So what I'm saying here is the following. I suggest that if you are smiling now, you will smile forever, because this is the worst year since 1991. This has been the biggest test for the housing market since 1991. It's a major test. And I know that it has been a tough year, tough 2 years, in fact. But I see the light. So let's discuss interest rates. We see some major disinflationary forces happening in an environment of a recessionary economy. I know that many of you are very disappointed because everybody promised you a recession, and we didn't get one. But we are in a recession. We are in a per capita recession. Per capita, GDP is negative 3%. Consumption is negative 4%. So the only reason why the economy is still a little bit above zero is because of the fact that we got 1.2 million people entering this country last year. You all know the story. This is not a way to grow an economy. Believe me, India also has a lot of people. That's not a way to grow an economy. You need to grow per capita. And that's not happening. You look at the labor market, it's slowing. You look at the housing market, definitely in recessionary territory. You look at business investment, negative. You look at sentiment, negative. So we are slowing down dramatically. The question is why the Bank of Canada not cutting now? The answer is two reasons. One is inflation. Inflation is still elevated. And as you all know, in a marathon, the last mile is the most difficult one. So you have a situation in which we move from 8% to 3% like that. Now you have to go from 3 to 2. Now we can discuss until we are blue in the face to what extent 2 is the right number. I think no, I think it should be 3 or 2.5. It doesn't make any difference because the Bank of Canada is not going to change it anytime soon. You need like a 500 PhD thesis to convince them to change it. It will take a while. So we are stuck with 2% inflation, which means that the cost of bringing inflation down to 2% is those recessionary conditions that we are looking at.
And I'll just throw a thought while you're in that framework. Isn't the Bank of Canada caught in this kind of catch-22? Because shelter costs in their basket of measurement of inflation is an enormous influence on that level of inflation at the moment, and they have caused that. So the movement up of interest rates to produce, let's call it 3.4% inflation level. If I take that out, I take shelter cost out, rental and mortgage rates, which are all a reflection of what the Bank of Canada has done, they're actually in the 2% range. Is that not fair? Or is
Bingo.
That's the dilemma they face?
That's exactly the point. And I've been making this point for a while now to the Bank of Canada, because think about it for a second, exactly as you say, Andrew. The Bank of Canada is trying to fight inflation by raising interest rates. Higher interest rates are adding to inflation vis-a-vis mortgage interest payments that are rising by 32%. In addition, because of the fact that nobody can afford buying, they are renting, so rent is by 8%. So by their very action, the Bank of Canada is adding to inflation. And if you remove mortgage interest payments from the calculations, we are already at 2%, already at the target. And that's why I believe that the Bank of Canada is overshooting. If the Bank of Canada was an AI machine, they would have stopped 50 basis points ago. So we are paying the price. And two things about that. First of all, the Bank of Canada is the only bank in the OECD that adds mortgage interest payments to its CPI calculation. The Fed does not do that. So if you compare the Fed is a much easier way of getting the inflation down to 2% because they don't have mortgage interest payments. That's very important. So we have to understand that the Bank of Canada, in my opinion, is overshooting. And that's something that is important. Another factor, why is it so important? You mentioned that over the past 6 months, the last 2 hikes were the most painful ones. Why? Because the effectiveness of monetary policy is rising for 2 reasons. One is that most of the inflation in the past was supply-based inflation. The Bank of Canada can raise interest rates to the sky. Believe me, Putin does not care about it because everything is coming from outside, Russia, the Middle East, and supply chain, China. Now, 80% of inflation is coming from domestic sources because supply chain is back to normal. So the effectiveness of monetary policy is stronger. And that's something that is enabling the Bank of Canada to fight inflation more effectively, but it's more painful. That's one thing. The other is the consumer. In the past, Andrew, we talked about this $160 billion of excess savings, people sitting on a lot of money. So when you have a lot of money on the side, excess savings, the Bank of Canada is raising interest rates, you neutralize the Bank of Canada by spending that money. So you don't feel the pain. Now this excess savings is zero, which means that you have a situation in which when the Bank of Canada raises interest rates, and that's exactly what happened in the last 2 hikes, you feel the pain more significantly because you don't have the buffer to protect you. So that's why it's more painful at this point. And of course, affordability is becoming a major issue. So the question is where the Bank of Canada is going. I think, as I told you in the past, that all those inflationary forces are now turning into disinflationary forces. We all go to the supermarket and we are amazed by how expensive food is. The Bank of Canada does not care. Not because of the fact that they are not nice guys, but because of the fact that inflation, and that's extremely important to understand, inflation at the end of the day is a rate of change. So if last year food prices were rising by 10%, and this year they're rising by 5%, that's disinflationary. Although they are still rising because it's a rate of change. So energy, food, commodities, they are all disinflationary now on a year-over-year basis. That's one thing. The other is, as I said, supply chain is back to normal. That means that you have a lot of forces acting as disinflationary, including profit margins, because many retailers during supply chain issues were taking advantage of that issue and raising prices. Now they cannot do it. That's disinflationary. Clearly, if you remove interest payments from the calculations, that's disinflationary, the way we measure it. And the labor market is normalizing. Last year, I was hinting that all those, vacancies, 1 million vacancies was a mirage. It's a mirage. It's falling like a stone now. It's sinking. The number of vacancies are now back to 2019 level. No issue. You need somebody, you find it. So what I'm saying here is that the labor market is normalizing big time. And therefore, all those forces, including wages, are disinflationary. So the Bank of Canada, you look at all those forces, and there is one more force, and that's the US economy. The US economy is basically an emerging market. They are rising by 4% because they are less sensitive to higher interest rates, as we discussed in previous conversations. Their fiscal policy was more significant. They spend much more. And their productivity is much faster than in Canada. So they are rising by 4%, we're rising by 0%. But even there in the US, we see some significant slowing in economic activity, reflecting the fact that higher interest rates are eventually impacting the economy. So you're the Fed, you're the Bank of Canada, you have to make a decision. First of all, let's establish, although they will never admit it, the Bank of Canada is done raising interest rates. We are done. So the question is, when are you cutting? Until yesterday, the Bank of Canada was projected by the market to start cutting in April. Then we got GDP numbers that were a bit stronger than expected, nothing to write home about, but a bit stronger than expected. And now the market is pricing in June. I agree that June is the right number, the right date. So my working assumption is that the overnight rate of the Bank of Canada will start going down starting June 2024. So we have another 5 months of those levels. Then by how much? We see 150 basis points down during the course of 2024, namely the second half of 2024, and a bit more in 2025, taking the overnight rate to, let's say, 275. Still notably higher than the 175 that we have seen before the crisis, but clearly much lower than current level of 5%. And let me remind you that your business can do extremely well at 3% overnight rate, if we know where it's going. Now, the 5-year rate, as we all know, has been going down dramatically over the past few weeks, few months, reflecting the fact that people are projecting some early cuts by the Bank of Canada, which means that we will not get a lot of decline, a significant decline in the 5-year rate because most of it is there. We'll see, we'll get another 25, 30, 35 basis points, maybe 50 basis points, and that will be it. It will not be the full 200 basis points that we are getting. So because it's already there. Still,
Probably
I think
hovering, Ben, around the 5% mark.
I think yes. I think that's a reasonable guess. Maybe 4.5 if we're lucky, but not what it used to be. Now let's go and talk about this repricing, the wave of repricing mortgages that is coming. So I think that people are panicking a bit too much about it. Interest rates will be going down. That will ease the pain. Already 47% of mortgages renewed already. So we're halfway there. So we have another halfway, and interest rates will be starting to going down. The average increase in payment will be roughly 7 to 10%, depends what month you renew. So I don't think that will be a major disaster. The people that are in trigger rate situation, the situation in which you have to borrow more, down from 20% to 15%. So it's already down in terms of the direction is very positive. So I'm not losing too much sleep over the repricing of mortgages over the next 2 years. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be easy, but it's not going to be devastating for the macroeconomic story. And it will not prevent the Bank of Canada from cutting or not cutting. So again, I think that we are starting in June. We are cutting to about 275, still 100 basis points higher than it was before, but I think something that the market can handle. So
it should cause, Ben, a movement, which I'm hopeful for in supply, that the renewal picture becomes more balanced, but it also then frees up the individual to move and to sell, and therefore supply increases as rates come down, therefore balancing any spike in prices. Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because one of the reasons why prices did not go down dramatically until now was the lack of supply. Basically, we had a situation in which people were not selling, so that was protecting prices. I believe, and that's historically the case, when interest rates start going down, people start, selling, and that will prevent a premature increase in prices and will protect the market a little bit because the supply will be rising. I think that's a good thing. I'm very concerned about supply coming from the new construction market because pre-sale is dead in the condo space. So I totally agree with you that in the near term will be in the next year, the condo market will be the one that will suffer the most because we simply have the inventories to work with. And but at the same time, we all know that pre-sale is dead. So the only thing that we're seeing now in terms of construction is what started 2 years ago, which means that 2 years from now, when you need the supply, it will not be there. And I don't think you will get the supply in the resale market the same because investors will be back in the market. So I think that we are going to see a weak condo market over the next year and a half, and then it will actually recover because of lack of supply in terms of prices. So I totally agree with you that in the first half of 2024, even in the second half, prices will not be rising as quickly as higher demand suggests because of the increase in supply.
And the condo scene is interesting because it's so hard to adjust this inventory. So much of I was just reading the Urbanation report just came out yesterday, and they're so low on the sales performance of new projects that have come to the market, barely meeting 30% of gross sales, where they're targeting trying to get to 70, and many projects stopped and stalled at 50%. We may see more pullback of that supply then as we go into 24. Those projects may not proceed, but at the same time, it's so hard to adjust in terms of price point. The only variable is land, and that's already baked in on the condo side on products that are coming through the system at the moment. On low rise, it's probably a little easier to adjust in that it's one house at a time or one lot at a time or one block at a time and not 300 units at a time. And so we think that low rise is in for a pretty good story through the balance of 24, where condo is not, as you've already touched on. Do you have the sense?
I totally agree. I think that the condo market will be soft over the next year. We simply have too much supply. I think that we are planting the seeds for higher prices down the road because we are not selling now. We are not,
Sure.
the pre-sales is dead. You know, you talk to developers and you know better than anybody else. Like they say, what they used to sell in a week, they're selling now in 6 months. Like it's crazy. Nobody's buying. So it's a very tough market, which means that the supply will not be coming. The demand is not stopping. We can talk about demand later, but the demand is not stopping. It's actually accelerating. So we
Yes.
know exactly what will happen. You don't have to be an economist. But in the next year, I totally agree. Low rise is where will be the pioneer of the recovery. And I think that clearly the condo market will be lagging. That goes without saying. We have to talk about the demand story. I was very, very vocal, and I met with the government and spoke to the Minister of Immigration about foreign students. I think we also discussed it in our discussions. I thought that it's crazy to have those numbers without the ability to house them. And we know that many of them are not students. About 20% of those foreign students never open a book in their life. They are not registered to study. They are not students. It's basically buying citizenship on the cheap. It's a license to get into Canada. That's not the way to run a country. That's not the way to run an immigration process. So I think that the cap on foreign students is the right thing to do. And it should be more significant because it's really not a model that we should continue with. And they are putting a lot of pressure on the rental market. And it's not fair to them, it's not fair to us. And therefore, I think that the cap is the right thing. And you have to go through, after all those, what they call bad players, I call it Mickey Mouse colleges, that are really not colleges, like the Advanced Mathematics Institute of Northern Ontario. Like, give me a break. Like, it doesn't really exist. You just pay $40,000 and you get a diploma.
And it was running at levels that we'd never, ever experienced before, close to 1 million.
Absolutely, and we have about 2.2 for non-permanent residents in this country. We are reaching a point, Andrew, in which we have to, institutions like UFT and others will have to lease their land to build on it temporary housing. Temporary, because foreign students are going to food banks at a rate we haven't seen before. They sleep on the street. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, crazy.
So that's not the way to run it. I think that the government is starting to get it. They were simply made a mistake with just allowing it to happen, because there's no quota on foreign students. The University of Toronto tomorrow can decide that all the students are foreign students. Nobody can stop them until now. And for them, that's the way to make money, especially for those, again, Mickey Mouse colleges that really don't do anything. So it seems that the province first will start with them, try to slow them down before they go to after the big universities. Because remember, the big universities are bailing out the province in terms of money, because you don't have to pay them because they get the money from foreign students. Without that money, the province will have to give them money. So it's complicated.
And the foreign student was making up I don't know what the percentage is, but it was significant in the condo market in terms of purchase of new condo units. And,
absolutely.
Pulling back on the reality of that doesn't help the condo market going forward, but it should bring it back into some balance.
Exactly. And I think that when we calculate demand for housing, we undercount not only the number, but also how many people need housing. Because if you're a foreign student, 22 years old, you don't have your parents to live with. While if you were born in Canada, you do have your parents. So in terms, Stats Canada assume it's the same rate of household formation. It's not. It's actually higher among foreign students. We are not counting it. So we are undercounting the demand for real estate.
Is there a level of, the argument about immigration really is the fundamental of it is in terms of our need for growth, and it's important as part of our economic growth and stimulus. The 500,000 target that the federal government put in play was blown away by as much as another 1 million or over 1 million, another 500,000 that came in students and conversion to permanent residency. So we had this kind of hidden immigration going on. is there an appropriate level? How do you balance between a housing need, demand, and the level of immigration?
Yeah,
Like it should be under the previous government, we were 350 was the annual target. That quickly changed to 5, and the last 2 years have been 1 million. Well, we've got ourselves into a real challenge with this high
yeah,
level
so
rental. Is there a
I
number that balances against growth, against GDP?
yes, I think that we are definitely not in this equilibrium, that's for sure. We are overshooting big time. I can tell you now that the likelihood of the government touching the 500,000 target of immigrants, permanent residents, they're not going to change it. And that's fine with me. What I need them to do is to change the point system, because only 2% of new immigrants are in construction. We need more of them. We need them more in nursing. So it's a point system that we have to play with. That's a 500. You cannot have another 2.2 million, 1 million more coming without really planning for that. Because at the end of the day, Andrew, people have to understand this is not a housing crisis. This is a planning crisis. A planning crisis. Yeah. Why? Because it takes municipalities, as you know, about 10 years to prepare. So 10 years ago, CMHC and the government went to municipalities and said, okay, the population will grow by X. And therefore, that's your quota. Start preparing the land, blah, 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 for this kind of population growth. We missed it by about 1.8, and all of them were non-permanent residents. So it's a planning. You cannot build something that you are not focused to build. Municipalities get their marching orders, and they prepare. And this marching order was way too low. So it's a planning crisis more than a housing crisis. It's possible.
That's a fantastic descriptions, Ben. You know, we do work in the U.S. and if I was in Houston today, the approval process is 18 months from the time you buy a piece of dirt, as long as you've got water. And they're there with open arms welcoming you. Now, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily want to live in Houston because of the sprawl, but the average house price is 1/3 of what Toronto's is.
And yes, and this is beyond that, Andrew. This is not just a speed. This is the level. Namely, if you go to a municipality in Ontario and said, listen, for the next 10 years, population will grow by X. Start preparing. So you get your marching order. You say, X, okay, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this. And let's assume they do everything perfectly. But they are planning for a population that is much lower than the real population. Yeah. Because the planning was wrong. And I can tell you that for the next 10 years, we are planning the planning is even worse because we are understating. You know, this 3.5 million by CMHC, you know that we have to build extra 3.5. But by now, it's already 4.2. Yeah. You update the numbers. It's crazy. It's like a moving target. So it's a planning process more than anything else.
Well, and then the issue comes back to immigration point system and construction workers. Even if we could shrink the demand with supply and bring on more product, how do we deliver it? We just don't have the labor to do it.
Absolutely. That's why the point system is so important. We have to invest in innovation. If you think that you can build 3.5 million units extra beyond business as usual without technology, you're dreaming. You're dreaming. You cannot build the way we used to build 50 years ago. You take a pilot from 50 years ago and put them in the plan today. They have no clue what to do. You put a construction worker in today's site, they know exactly what to do because we're doing it the same way. So innovation, 3D printing, factory-made houses. Without it, we have no chance. And the government should be a big part of investing in that.
That's underway in some circles, and certainly we're involved in several with builders, developers on the manufactured modular side. It's going to be a very interesting launch of some of that into 24. It may take till year end, but that's a trend line that's coming. That will help for certain. But this whole one of the kind of another unintended consequence is lower volume in a municipality has led to higher taxes. In other words, a municipality looks at their development charge level and says, gosh, we're doing fewer housing units. We better raise that level of development charge to maintain our revenue stream. And suddenly you artificially underlying, even though there's lower volume, a higher price. It's
exactly the opposite of what you need to be doing at this point. That's the opposite. We need to provide incentives to developers. I was very involved in the debate regarding HST for purpose-built. I wrote a piece in the Globe and Mail. I said that we need to do that because as I told you before, I believe that purpose-built rental is an important part of the solution for our affordability crisis. And we need to provide some sort of incentives to purpose-built rental to ease the pressure. And the government is doing it to an extent. To what extent we can do it to condos, I will go for it. Why not? The HST is something that you don't need in housing. We need more supply. Don't tax it. So I think that's the direction to go, quite frankly. We need to provide, you cannot have an affordability solution while treating developers as your enemy. You need the private sector for that.
US growth is slowing, yet the GDP bump in December was accredited to export market and a greater because of the growth within the US, but that's coming sliding down. They're catching up. You're seeing certainly on the tech side significant layoffs within the US at the moment. So they're probably behind us in terms of adjusting to interest rates. What's the impact of that over the first half of this year? A US economy slowing, obviously an election at year end. Where that goes, anyone could speculate. But what about this relationship of our greatest trading partner right next door? How will that impact us?
Yeah, the US was outperforming big time. And, it depends on what data you look, because there's debate whether or not you look at GDP or GDI, which is gross domestic income. GDI is actually showing a much weaker economy. GDP is showing a strong economy. So there's a debate about among economists how really strong the US economy is. Regardless, there's no debate about the fact that it's slowing down. If you look at the leading indicator index, it's basically at a recessionary level. If you look at the credit to commercial clients, which is a very good indicator, basically negative. So clearly the US economy, under the weight of higher interest rates, starting to slow down. Remember, they are less sensitive than we are. That's why you're absolutely right. There's a lag effect, because our mortgages are for 5 years. Their mortgages are for 30 years. So in the mortgage channel, you don't feel the pain as much in the US relative to Canada, where the mortgage market is basically in a recessionary territory. But it's coming. The US economy is slowing down, and we will feel the pain. And that's why I believe that Canada will have to cut interest rates more than the Fed. And therefore, we see the Bank of Canada moving 150, the second half of 2024, while the Fed only 100, starting a little bit later than that. So yeah,
our spread between the two countries has been hovering around about a half a point. Can that spread grow wider without serious impact on the Canadian dollar? Or
yeah, absolutely.
Do you see that pattern continuing?
I think, if you look at the past, the ratio, like the gap was 75 to 100 basis points. So 50 basis points is actually relatively narrow.
Okay.
And I think that we can definitely tolerate another 25 with no pain whatsoever. I think that's exactly what the market is looking
at. Chris, questions from the audience. Let's perhaps go there and take some if we've got some, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Ben. Actually, I think the questions from the audience, some of them are actually, if anything, confirming and agreeing with what we've been talking about. So a couple here. This is more of a statement. David Miner. Hi, David. How are you? New projects are not working because of high interest rates and trade shortages. We covered that, and as immigration stays high. So what's the prognosis for new home prices and rents moving forward? I think Andy, do you want to touch on that really quickly? I think we have covered it.
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
I don't think we'll see little or no change going forward on the high-rise side on condo. In fact, it will go through a bumpy period first half through to the second half until 25. We may see even further correction on the high-rise side. Not huge because it's very hard to do, but there's you know, Q Tower yesterday came out with a promotion at $1,300 a foot, and they were at 15. So there's a break in a stack of product they brought to market. We'll just see how the market reacts to that. That's a very interesting reaction. They've sold 300 plus units and kind of stalled and it's a big building. I think it's 900 units in total, and now release a 1,300 a foot. Those kind of adjustments you're going to see in condo to try to get at this inventory. On the low rise side, it's the opposite story. We're going to have more and more product coming to market, and a much better qualifying position from the consumer, and prices subject to this supply side could move up, but I don't think dramatically. But I think it's probably just ahead of inflation, probably in the 4 to 5% range when we get to year end. Can Ben, anything you want to?
Yeah, I know David very well. He's extremely knowledgeable when it comes to the market. He knows the market very well, and he knows where we are going from there. I think that I totally agree. I think that the casualty will be the condo space over the next year. It's very clear to me. But again, we are planting the seeds for higher prices down the road. We just have to go through this adjustment process. Remember, interest rates will be much lower a year from now, a year and a half from now. The mathematics of the condo market will start looking differently. 2 years from now, I see this condo taking off, but we will see an adjustment process.
Here's an interesting one, and we haven't really talked about this, is OSFI and the stress
test.
I think that it's not going to, nothing is going to happen, quite frankly. We put a lot of pressure on OSFI. We talked to them many times. Nothing is going to happen, unfortunately. It doesn't make any sense to me.
They did remove the qualifying MQR on renewals, which was important because you were into this fear factor later in the year that renewals were going to face a conundrum of higher rate. Now they take away that. The unintended consequence of that is that individual renews. He didn't have to qualify at the MQR 2 points higher, and he stays where he is. He doesn't move in the market, so it clogs up the system when the rest of the market can't move up or down, having to qualify at that additional 2 points. To me, it's a bit of Big Brother trying to run our lives. I don't want to sound political, but the impact is, let's let the market deal with the market, and then let the marketplace unfold as it should, against what the market rate is, not this artificial. Now, I recognize that in 2017, it turned out to actually be good policy because it saved us from the dramatic increase later that people were able to adjust because they'd qualified at a higher rate. But now it's a doubling down. Now it's adding to the pain and suffering, and it's time to change.
As you know, I've been saying for a while that I have no problem with the test itself. I think it's just the way it's designed. It should be sensitive to where we are in the economic cycle and the interest rate cycle. Where you're at the peak, you cannot have 200, and then when you're at the bottom, you have 200. It doesn't make any sense. And I think that's the only thing to change. I'm for stress tests. I think it's a good thing, but it has to be reasonable.
Ben, I know we have you only for about 5 more minutes, so I'm going to throw another couple questions out, and we'll go from there. So this is an interesting one, and it's another that we haven't really talked about. And Andy, I might put this to you, and Ben, chime in as well. Thanks to Dennis Chan. So what is the feeling in the luxury or higher end of the market with respect to pricing that's over $3 million now that the luxury tax is in place?
Andrew?
Boy, well, that's the 600-pound gorilla.
Yeah,
they can sit anywhere they want. So the tax will artificially construe the market at that 3 million level. So if you were doing your pro forma and you ended up with a new product that was 3.1, you're going to bring it on at 299.99 and avoid the tax. So it will have a ceiling effect. But once we move into the 4 and 5 and 6 million range, it's a small portion of the market. I don't think that it really has a huge, the tax doesn't have a huge influence on the discretionary ability of that buyer. If they want it, they'll get it. But it, again, it's a artificial placement on true market conditions. The greater the tax, the lower the performance and absorption levels. So I'm just not a tax fan on these kinds of things interfering in housing. You know, we're more highly regulated than the Atomic Energy Control Commission, for God's sake. And this has been part of the regulatory, as Ben described it, the planning crisis. It's also a tax crisis. So these two factors are driving spikes into the housing recession that continues and doesn't allow us to recover and become market sensitive. It's we get more distortion. So that'd be my comment about it, Ben.
I agree. I think that for this segment of the market, the tax will not be a major factor.
Okay.
Ben's better at answering these questions quickly and succinctly than I am.
Well, you know what? I think, Andy, we'll close up with this final one. Ben, it was wonderful to see you. Please stay on if you're able to, and chime in as well. In addition to the innovation that we talked about in in the process of construction you talked about, do you think that there is also a need for innovation in marketing and marketing process and marketing tools, like what we saw with virtual presentations in the sales centers? Andy?
Oh, well, the digital age is upon us.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's no question that we've adapted. COVID led us with a vengeance into the virtual digital age. There will be more of it. It'll become more significant. We will be doing much greater emphasis on digital communication. There's two areas now that we'll find complete specialization within this, and that's what we're calling a CRM specialist, someone who's on the follow-up page, because the follow-up communication is the critical cornerstone of digital marketing. And then a closing specialist, moving someone from appointment to an actual sale. And all of this, and much of this, will be done online, on the phone, on the wide variety of platforms that we've now created. It's a disruptor, and I think we've managed it extremely well, and we're getting better and better at it. There will always be a touch and feel element to our business in the new housing side, probably, and resale. But for 90% of our transactions are now going to focus much greater on digital and virtual than we ever have before.
And focusing on the customer and on customer service. I think we're going back to the time where it's, KYC is more important than ever. And every person that's in front of you is your most important customer at that time. I think we're going to see a shift back to more customer-centric engagements in the sales offices. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Ben, it was lovely to see you. And thank you so much for your support, for the bank's support, for helping us with these sessions. And your insights are always so valuable to everyone on the call. We've had one of the largest audiences in our 4-year history today. So thank you for that, gentlemen. Without further ado, before we close up, we'll start off with our quick draw, as we always do. It's one thing we aren't changing. So again, for complimentary lunch certificates, courtesy of CIBC, our first winner is Alon Spensel from Sundance Homes. And our
Congrats.
second is Michael Miela. Mike will also reach out to you. CIBC will reach out to you both with your prizes. So I'd like to thank everyone today for joining us. Again, a very extra special thank you to Andy and to Ben, and to all of our sponsors, including McEwitt. It's Leanne's birthday today, so happy birthday to Leanne, everyone. If you are one of her clients, be sure to pick up the phone. On March the 21st, please sign up now. When you get the invitation, we are planning another builder and developer summit with a panel made up of people from the key stakeholders and decision makers from the industry on the home builder and real estate development side. That's coming up on March the 21st. Thank you very much for making our first session of season 5 success, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in March.
Thanks, everyone.